There is a passage in the Book of Enoch that the Western scholarly tradition has classified for over a century as poetic atmospheric description. The classification appears in R.H. Charles's 1906 English translation, which remains the most widely cited edition in popular literature, where the relevant verses from chapter 41 are rendered in 3 sentences and described in a footnote as lyrical elaboration on the meteorological phenomena associated with divine power lyrical elaboration. That classification has been repeated in every major Western treatment of chapter 41 since 1906 without significant challenge. It appears in the academic commentaries. It appears in the popular books. It appears in the online summaries that most people encounter when they search for information about Enoch. Lyrical elaboration on meteorological phenomena. The Ge'ez manuscript of the Book of Enoch, held at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia, uses none of the vocabulary associated with poetic or lyrical composition in the passage. Those 3 sentences represent. The Ge'ez text of chapter 41 uses a vocabulary that appears elsewhere in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition in one category of document and one category of document-only military orders. The specific Ge'ez constructions used in the full chapter 41 passage appear in Ethiopian military texts to describe a command structure who issues orders, to whom those orders are directed, what the orders specify when they are to be executed, at what geographical location and under whose authority the execution occurs. Chapter 41 of the Book of Enoch, in its complete Ge'ez form, is not a poem about lightning. It is a command structure document describing who decides where lightning strikes, who carries out the decision, what the chain of authority is from the decision to the execution, and what name sits at the top of that chain. And the name at the top of that chain appears in one other place in the documents of the Western religious tradition in the New Testament. In a context that the institutional church has never been required to connect to chapter 41 of Enoch, because chapter 41 of Enoch has never been permitted to reach the people sitting in its pews in the form that would make the connection visible. The Council of Laodicea removed the Book of Enoch from Christian scripture in 364 CE. The stated reason, as in every other case where the Council's decision touched on Enoch, was content describing the operation of the divine order in ways that exceeded proper revelation. But the private records of the Council's deliberations, preserved in fragmentary form in the Latin archive tradition, and examined in detail by Dr. Philip Alexander of the University of Manchester in a 2007 paper on the reception history of Enoch in early Christianity, contain a specific reference to what the bishops called the problem of the assignment texts. The assignment texts, not the vision texts, not the throne texts, not the cosmological texts. The assignment texts, a category defined by the Council's own language as passages in Enoch that describe the delegation of specific actions to specific named beings for execution at specific times and places. Passages that read, in the Council's own characterization, as operational directives rather than prophetic visions. The Council's concern with the assignment texts was not theological in the sense of doctrinal error. It was operational. An operational directive is a different kind of text from a theological statement. A theological statement tells you what to believe. An operational directive tells you how something works. And a text that tells you how the command structure for lightning works, who is in that structure, what their names are, and what authority they operate under, is a text that places in the hands of its readers a form of knowledge that the institutional church has never been comfortable distributing without mediation. Chapter 41 of the Book of Enoch in the complete Ge'ez tradition begins with Enoch being shown what the text calls the storehouses of the winds. The R.H. Charles edition renders this as a poetic image. The Ge'ez word for storehouses is the same word used elsewhere in the Ethiopian manuscript tradition to describe a military supply depot, a place where resources are held for distribution on command rather than available freely. The winds are in a storehouse, not because the image is poetic, but because they are held in reserve for directed release. The text then moves immediately to what it calls the manner of the lightning. The Ge'ez word for manner here is not the word for appearance or for quality. It is the word for procedure. The procedure of the lightning. the operational term used in the Ethiopian military and administrative tradition for the set of steps that constitute a defined and repeatable process. Chapter 41 describes the procedure of lightning with the specificity of a process document. Step 1. The command originates at a specific level of the authority structure. Step 2. The command is transmitted through a named intermediary. Step 3. The named intermediary directs the execution to a named agent. Step 4. The named agent carries out the strike at a specified location under conditions specified by the command. Each step is described with the same Jesus grammatical constructions used in the military order documents of the Ethiopian tradition. Each name in the chain is given with the specificity of an organizational chart entry, and the chain has a top. There is a name at the highest level of the command structure that Enoch records with the same matter of fact precision he uses throughout the text. When recording things Uriel has shown him or told him, the intermediary named in the chain is the element that the R.H. Charles edition handles most carefully and least accurately. The GES text names the intermediary with a specific name and assigns to that name a specific function within the command structure. The function of transmission. The intermediary does not decide. The intermediary does not execute. The intermediary transmits the command from the authority above to the agent below. The GES word for the intermediary's function is a form of the root used elsewhere in the Ethiopian administrative tradition to describe a herald, a figure whose role is defined entirely by the faithful transmission of a message from its source to its destination without alteration or interpretation. The intermediary in the lightning command structure is a herald, named functioning, present in the structure at every execution of the process. The R.H. Charles edition renders this figure as a general reference to an angelic messenger without preserving the name or the specific functional designation. The name the GES uses for this intermediary does not appear in the R.H. Charles edition of chapter 41 at all. It is absorbed into the general category of angelic messenger, and the name is not preserved in the English text. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, in his 1983 Oxford translation, preserved the name but described it in a footnote as a variant name of uncertain relation to the named angel figures of the canonical tradition. Uncertain relation. The name the GES text uses for the lightning command's herald is a name that appears in one other place in the documents available to Western readers. It appears in a specific passage of the New Testament in a context that no academic commentary on that New Testament passage has connected to the Enoch chapter 41 lightning command structure, because the chapter 41 structure has never been presented in any widely available form that would make the name recognizable to a New Testament scholar reading it. The agents named below the herald in the command structure are where the text becomes most specific and most difficult for the Western translation tradition to handle. The GES chapter 41 names 4 agents. Each one is assigned to a geographical domain, not a cardinal direction in the abstract cosmological sense used elsewhere in Enoch. Specific geographical domains. The first agent's domain is described in terms that correspond to the region extending from the eastern Mediterranean through the area of the Levant. The second agent's domain covers the territory extending from the highland plateau of northern Africa through the region of the Arabian Peninsula. The third agent's domain covers the vast interior of what the text calls the great land beyond the northern sea. The fourth agent's domain is described as the remaining territories, a designation that implies a residual category covering what the first 3 domains do not. 4 agents, 4 geographical domains, a command structure that assigns the execution of lightning strikes across the inhabited world to specific named beings operating within specific defined territories under the direction of a named herald who transmits commands from a named authority above. This is not atmospheric poetry. This is a jurisdictional map, a map of who is responsible for what happens in the sky above each region of the world, operating under a chain of command that Enoch records with the same documentary precision he uses when recording the architecture of the ocean floor prison or the physical dimensions of the sealed gate beneath the 4th mountain. Dr. Lorenz Stuckenbruck of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, whose work on the broader Aramaic Enoch tradition is the most comprehensive currently available in the academic literature, addressed the Chapter 41 material in a 2016 seminar paper on the meteorological passages of Enoch. The paper is primarily concerned with the astronomical book material in chapters 72 through 82, and treats the chapter 41 passage as a secondary topic. In a single paragraph, Stuckenbrook notes that the chapter 41 material in the Ge'ez tradition contains vocabulary that is more consistent with administrative or military document conventions than with the apocalyptic literary register dominant elsewhere in the Book of the Watchers. He describes this vocabulary as potentially reflecting source material of a different provenance than the surrounding chapters, source material of a different provenance. The diplomatic language of a scholar who has identified something that does not fit the standard classification and has chosen to note it without pursuing the implications. The paragraph is the last paragraph of the relevant section. No subsequent paper by Stuckenbrook addresses the chapter 41, administrative vocabulary in the Ge'ez tradition. The seminar paper was not published in a peer-reviewed journal. It circulates in the form of a conference proceedings document available through the university's online research repository. It has been downloaded 47 times since its upload in 2017. No citing paper has addressed the administrative vocabulary observation. The Qumran fragments complicate the picture in a direction that the publication structure of the Dead Sea Scroll project has made difficult to trace. Fragment the fourth quarter of 29. Typically associated with the astronomical Book of Enoch and catalogued accordingly, contains a passage that J. Fazif Milik identified in his 1976 publication as belonging to the transition material between the astronomical book and the Book of the Watchers. In the margins of his working copy of the fragment photographs, which were donated to the École Biblique archive in Jerusalem after his death and have been examined by a limited number of subsequent scholars, Milik wrote a single annotation beside the passage in question. The annotation, in French, translates approximately as names here consistent with chapter 41. Assignment structure. Check against Ethiopian. Check against Ethiopian. Milik saw the passage in the fourth quarter of 29 and identified it as relating to the chapter 41 assignment structure. He wrote a note to himself to check it against the Ethiopian Ge'ez tradition. The published edition of the fourth quarter of 29 does not contain this observation. The published edition describes the passage as a damaged section of transitional material with uncertain thematic content. The margin annotation exists in the working copy at the École Biblique. It has been seen by scholars who have worked with Milik's archive materials. It has not been published in any peer-reviewed treatment of the fourth quarter of 29. The check against Ethiopian that Milik directed himself to perform either was performed, and the results not published, or was not performed because his access to the Ethiopian materials was as limited as every other Western scholar's access after 1974. Either way, the annotation sits in the archive at the École Biblique, directing a line of inquiry that has not been followed in the 48 years since it was written. The name at the top of the command structure is the element Jerome found most dangerous. The private correspondence preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Library contains a letter from Jerome to a fellow scholar in which he describes what he calls the authority attribution problem in the Enoch meteorological texts. His language in the letter is careful. He does not name the name. He describes the problem in terms of what he calls an inappropriate identification between the agent of natural phenomena and a figure whose identity belongs to a different order of theological discussion. An inappropriate identification between the agent of natural phenomena, meaning the name at the top of the lightning command structure in chapter 41, and a figure whose identity belongs to a different order of theological discussion. Jerome is describing a connection between the chapter 41 name and a figure in the theological tradition he is working to consolidate in the Latin Vulgate. He finds the connection inappropriate, not because it is false, but because it is not something he wants circulating in the form of a text that ordinary readers can access without theological training sufficient to manage the implications. The name at the top of the lightning command structure is a name that Jerome recognized, a name that connects chapter 41 to a figure in a different body of text. And Jerome's response to that recognition was to ensure that the text containing the name did not reach the general Christian public in a form that would make the recognition possible for someone reading without his theological training. The New Testament passage that contains the relevant name is in the Gospel of John chapter 12, verse 29. The context is the moment when a voice speaks from heaven in response to Jesus' prayer, and the crowd that hears it disagrees about what they heard. Some say it was thunder. Some say an angel spoke. The Greek text of that passage uses a word for the sound that the crowd interprets as thunder, a word that in the Greek of the New Testament period carries the specific connotation of a directed and purposeful strike, rather than the diffuse atmospheric phenomenon of general thunder. The crowd that says it was thunder is not wrong about what they heard. They are wrong about what thunder is. And the crowd that says an angel spoke is identifying the mediating element in the command structure that Enoch's chapter 41 describes. The voice from heaven, the sound interpreted as thunder. The angel whose speech produces what the crowd hears as a natural meteorological phenomenon. The structure implied in John chapter 12 verse 29, a voice from above mediated by an angelic presence, producing what sounds to human ears like thunder, is the structure chapter 41 of Enoch describes as a command structure with named agents and defined geographical jurisdictions. The crowd in John 12 is hearing an instance of the process that Enoch's chapter 41 documents. They are hearing it without the document, without the names, without the organizational chart, without the jurisdictional map, without the chain of authority from the command above to the execution below. They hear thunder and they hear an angel, and they do not have the text that would tell them that those two things are the same event described from two different levels of awareness of the process producing it. Jerome had both texts. He had the Gospel of John in the Greek tradition he was translating into Latin. He had the Book of Enoch material through the scholarly contacts and manuscript access available to a scholar of his standing in the late 4th century. He read chapter 41. He read John 12:29. He wrote a private letter describing what he called the authority attribution problem. And then he compiled a Latin Bible that contained John 12:29 and did not contain chapter 41. The crowd in the Gospel of John stands with its disagreement intact. Some saying thunder, some saying an angel, and no text available to them that resolves the disagreement by explaining that both groups are correct, and that the text which would show them why has been classified as lyrical elaboration on meteorological phenomena by the scholars who translated it and left out of the Bible by the bishops who removed it in 364 CE. The access situation in 2024 is as follows. The GE's chapter 41 in its full form, with the complete command structure, all 4 agent names, the herald name, and the name at the top of the chain, is in the Oxum manuscripts inaccessible since 1974. The photographic copies at the Oriental Institute in Oxford require authorization that has not been sought with sufficient institutional momentum to obtain it. The 4th quarter of 29 fragment at the Israel Museum contains material that Millick's unpublished margin annotation connects to the chapter 41 assignment structure, but the published edition of the 4th quarter of 29 does not reflect this connection, and no subsequent scholarship has pursued it. The Stuckenbrook 2016 seminar paper noting the administrative vocabulary in the GE's chapter 41 tradition has been downloaded 47 times and cited by no subsequent peer-reviewed work. The Jerome private letter describing the authority attribution problem is in the Vatican Apostolic Library in a collection that requires individual researcher access requests processed through the Vatican's prefect of the Apostolic Library, a process that takes between 1 and 3 years and is subject to discretionary denial without explanation. The crowd in John 12:29 still disagrees. Some say it was thunder. Some say an angel spoke, and in a text that the Western Church classified as lyrical elaboration and removed from its Bible 17 centuries ago. A man named Enoch recorded the names of the beings who produce what sounds to human ears like thunder, the chain of authority under which they operate, the geographical jurisdictions to which each of them is assigned, and the name at the top of that chain that Jerome read and called an authority attribution problem, and then buried in a private letter in an archive that requires a 3-year access process and discretionary approval to read. The lightning is still falling. The procedure Enoch documented is still operating. The agents are still executing commands within their assigned jurisdictions. And the name at the top of the command structure is still in the GE's manuscript in Axum, in the passage that has been classified as lyrical elaboration for over a century by scholars who either did not read the full text or read it, and made the same choice Jerome made when he closed his letter, set down his stylus, and compiled a Bible that contained the crowd's disagreement and none of the text that would resolve it.